With the Miami Dolphins facing a major needed offensive guard this offseason, just how good is the free agency class of available talent that Miami could sign next month?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special shout out and welcome to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL today. Terms and conditions do apply. We are looking at the offensive guard free agency class as things currently stand, which is an important note because now that the calendar has flipped to February, you may start to see some teams that proactively get player contract extensions done with pending free agents. There's about 6 weeks left until the start of the league calendar year. So it's deadline spur action is the saying that is often applied to the NFL. But for the interior offensive line group in particular, I think it's really fascinating when you contrast where teams spent dollars at this position group last year with just how many players got big time investments, $15+ million per season. It wasn't just Robert Hunt, right? You think about Kevin Dotson and the contract extension that he signed with the Rams, and then Jonah Jackson and the deal that he signed with the Rams to be the other guard there. I mean, those were both $16+ million a year players. And you can also look at the double dip that the Panthers did, where they gave Robert Hunt the 5-year, $100 million contract, but then they also came out and gave Damian Lewis what was about $13+ million per. And that's, I think, the first thing that I should note is this year's free agency class of guards is not to the degree of which there were quality starters available in last year's free agency class. So I think that in and of itself is a positive development for the Dolphins to find fair market signings that are not going to be priced out of Miami's range. Now, you can get into Trey Smith from the Chiefs, and you can hold him and his resume up against anybody from last year's free agency class of guard. And I think Trey Smith would have a case to have the nod, and he's coming off of playing on a rookie contract in which he was a day 3 pick. So he had adjustments to his pay based off his playing time. But he has less than $6 million in career earnings through 4 seasons of being an NFL player. And he's certainly going to want to cash that in. And that probably is going to be a market reset contract, just because there are enough teams with cap space, whether that is maybe the Patriots, maybe not the Patriots, the Cardinals, the Bears, the Bengals. These are all teams that have offensive line needs and salary cap space that's top quarter of the NFL this upcoming offseason. And I think if you were to theoretically get into the boat of competing for a signing like that, it's probably not going to be a story that ends particularly well for the Dolphins. But I do think the fact that outside of Trey Smith, the top names here as far as expiring contracts, Zach Martin at 35 years old, Brandon Sheriff at 34 years old. Those are the only two players that are coming off of big deals that were averaging more than $10 million or more per season that are set to hit the free agency class. So it's not like there's a bunch of well-established names. And the two that we just mentioned in Martin and Scherf are kind of late-stage players that I would not expect them to sniff anywhere near that amount. And for the Dolphins, that really flies in the face of what I think this team frankly needs. I would hate to see this team come out and sign a couple of 35-year-old veterans to be presumed starters for you and fill that void and continue to have an eye on plugging the gaps short term as compared to starting the process of having the next nucleus in place for an extended, several seasons. So that's part of this too for Miami that I think you have to weigh out as far as the value of just checking the box and saying, well, we don't need this position anymore, but threading that needle of addressing the need that very obviously exists, but doing so in a way that sets the stage for you to maybe have some year-over-year viability with these spots. Because I think it is there. The ideology did not work that the Dolphins pursued, but I do think, as is the case with just about anything, continuity and continued time on task and stability gives you the best chance to actually have success. So we're going to get a little bit more into the top of market, because I think the top of market with this is more the players that are coming off of rookie contracts or players that are still in their 20s as compared to the Zach Martins and Brandon Sheriffs of the world. So we're going to get into that next year on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you guys stick with us. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile to double your reach with qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LinkedIn/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So we're obviously back at home after a week of travel to Dallas and Mobile for the Shrine and the Senior Bowl. And now we transitioning away from prospects a little bit to focus on some free agency outlooks of positions of need for the Dolphins. And this interior offensive line, this guard spot, has been such a highly hyper-focused area of this roster. I would expect, based off of the trends of this organization over the last 3 years, they will sufficiently sign new blood to come in here and be a part of this mix. Would it surprise me if they brought back Rob Jones as a 26-year-old player who you could probably sign for? He was back last year on a 1-year, $2 million contract. Like, would you surprise me to see him sign something like that again? Which they could do first, because they retain his rights until the start of the league year, in which his rights would be released and he would be allowed to negotiate a free agency contract. And I'm sure everybody would lose their minds if the Dolphins renegotiated and extended Robert Jones before the window, and that was a standalone move for them. But If you told me that they brought him back on a 1-year, $2 million deal or something like that, similar to what he did last year, would it surprise me? No. It would also not surprise me if they did get involved and competitive with some of the bigger names on this market. I think when you look at, when you want to figure out who the top of market is, teams don't pay for what you've been, should not pay for what you've been. They should pay for what you're going to be. So players in their prime, I think, have a higher likelihood of being top of market players. So you have to find the intersection of in your physical prime alongside and contrasted with the quality of your play. So, for example, Trey Smith played 97% of the snaps for the Chiefs last year. He's been a multi-year starter. He's been a very impactful player. He's 26 years old. That's going to be a top of market contract player because the understanding is he's going to play out the full term. He has the ability to play out the full term of his contract, right? I think Will Fries from the Colts is another name to note here when you consider he came in as a right guard from, he was drafted by the Colts in the 7th round out of Penn State in 2021. And his first year, he played just a handful of snaps. And then in 2022, he played in 16 games and took 56% of the offensive snaps. And then in 2023, played 98% of the snaps and then missed 12 games this year. And only played 25% of the snaps. But it's a player who developed in Indianapolis and is 27 years old and developed into a starter. I think that's a player that has a reasonable chance to be amongst the top of the list for top of market players. Other players that are in their 20s that have been prominent starters would include James Daniels, was a name that was attached to the Dolphins from the rumor mill perspective in training camp. But he's coming off of an Achilles tear as a 28-year-old guard who was making over $8 million per season. I would expect if there's positive feedback on the medicals there, but I do think the medical situation with James Daniels is probably going to be pretty prohibitive from him being a competitive top of market contract. Aaron Banks, former 2nd-round pick for San Francisco, is a player who, from a playtime perspective, he's played at least 70% of the offensive snaps for San Francisco in each of the last 3 seasons. I think the consistency of his play is not great, but you saw guys like John Runyon Jr. signed for $10 million per with the Giants last offseason, and I thought his play was pretty similar. So these top of market players, I think you're talking about a market price that's probably somewhere around 10 to 12, unless it's Trey Smith, and Trey Smith is probably getting I certainly think he's surpassing Rob Hunt's dollars. If you told me it was $22, $23 million, I wouldn't bat an eye. So for Miami, it's just a matter of, okay, realistically, who do we think is the right intersection of maybe some long-term stability at the position? And that's what they did with Aaron Brewer, right? It's like, hey, he's a fit for us with his play. He's young enough. And because he's a fit for us with his style of play, we can get him at a dollar amount that is not super prohibitive versus trying to compare him to the top of market center contracts, which like Ryan Kelly was at 12.5, right? That's about almost twice what Brewer's getting from Miami. So you kind of have to play this game a little bit as far as finding projections, or the other alternative is to go more into the depth of the class and try to find players that are maybe a little bit less attractive, if we're being honest, but are players that don't have the same economic risk. I know what I would do if it were me making the decision. I would quit farting around with this group and I would try to sign at least one player who you feel can be a multi-year starter at this position, provided you can get him in that strike zone around probably $10 million per season. I think that, bring back Rob Jones, bring in an additional free agent guard that maybe is in the depth levels of the class that has some risk. And then if you added an offensive lineman that has guard tackle flexibility in the NFL draft, now suddenly I think you're looking at a group that has the kind of infusion of talent that it needs, especially depending on what style of play the players that you're pursuing. And bringing in, do they have a more diverse menu as far as things that they're capable of executing for you, which I think was a limiting factor for the Dolphins last year. So how deep does the quality go in this free agency class? We're just going to read some names next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Big game is almost here. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports with over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings. Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you are cashing out. You can check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can split. You can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. If you are looking for tickets to your next big event, maybe last minute tickets to the big game, whether it's a concert, comedy show, sports game, theater, you name it, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. If you're ready to make your next event even better, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So I'm not going to sit here and say all these players are like, yeah, we should definitely sign these players. But as far as like viable starting players, I do think you have to include players like Zach Martin and Brandon Scherf, but I think that ideology would be dramatically flawed, and I would not be a huge fan of bringing in late-stage career players to come in and bridge the gap for you the way that we did this year with Jordan Poyer. Right. And it cuts both ways. There's the Jordan Poyer outcomes and there's the Calais Campbell outcomes. And I will readily acknowledge how great Calais Campbell was for the Dolphins this year. And I would want Calais Campbell back. But you're talking about new investments in players that are probably still going to cost at least B-level dollars. And that was part of what was attractive about Calais Campbell was you signed Calais Campbell for peanuts when he played for you. Brandon Scherf coming off of an $18 million APY contract. You think he's going to sign for $2 million to play somewhere? Or do you think if he's going to decide he wants to play, he's still probably at least going to get $10 million? And maybe he gets maybe there's stipulated money that's involved there. But he played 55% of the snaps this year for Dallas. James Daniels coming off the Achilles tear. You have Kevin Zeitler, another 35-year-old veteran, was in Detroit this year on a 1-year, $6 million deal. That maybe would have been an attractive bridge player in my mind for Miami last year. But now the frame of mind this offseason as compared to last is very different, where you're not trying to put together a better overall product than last year to stay competitive for one more year. I think the focus needs to be setting up the next nucleus of the team while simultaneously trying to compete through the transition that's taking place. And I know that that's not a very pleasant place to be when the peaks of what the past cycle was, what the peaks of the past cycle were, but I'm not going to sit here and cry about it, right? It's like, how does what's the best path forward for this team based off where they are right now? And that for me is you have to really ramp up the competitiveness on the roster and bring in youth in volume. So Zeitler, I think, is a player that maybe flies in the face of some of that a little bit as far as where the value is for Miami. Now, I think once you get a little south of this, now you're into an economic price point where there's a lot of names that I think are interesting. Will Hernandez, power player, man. He's got a ton of power. He's 30. He missed most of the season this year with an injury himself, but has a pretty strong track record. And he kind of transitioned slow after he first came into the league, but had really found his footing. A player like that is attractive to me. Because you're talking under $5 million and he's 30. So, yes, it's not a young player, but it's a player who has at least some kind of a multi-year runway where he could contribute to your team. And I think is a dramatic difference as far as short area point of attack power and ability to reset the line of scrimmage and do all those things the Dolphins really couldn't do last year. Like that's kind of where his strengths lie. And if you're looking to diversify your run game as far as what you can call in certain game situations, bringing in different skill sets would be very helpful to do that. Ben Bredesen with the Bucks, 27 years old, played 99% of the snaps on a $3 million deal as a sufficient level starter that exists. Tevin Jenkins, I actually watched his tape. I was really high on him as a right tackle coming out of Oklahoma State in the draft and was very surprised at how underwhelmed I thought his tape was. So that's a player who if you would have told me 2 years ago, hey, Tevin Jenkins is going to hit free agency, he's playing guard, would you be interested? I'd have jumped all over that opportunity, but it's a player that I'm a little bit more leery on now. Another veteran player, Daniel Brunskill, has experience playing in this scheme, has been an adequate starter, sufficient starter in this scheme, not an expensive player. His past contracts APY was under $3 million per season. He played 62% of the snaps for the Titans last year. He's 31. Right. So I think if you're going to go up into the upper echelon of the veteran contracts, guys like Will Hernandez and Daniel Brunskill are probably as high up as I would be willing to go as far as like the age dynamic. But I think Aaron Banks makes a ton of sense as a 28-year-old guy coming off a rookie contract who's had some playing time, experience in the system, does have some of the displacement skill set that we are looking for as far as upgrades. But didn't quite necessarily reach his full potential. Sometimes guys just take a little bit longer, especially in the offensive line. People have done studies about breakout age on the offensive line as far as transitioning from the league. Obviously, the elite guys make that jump happen really fast, but a lot of guys don't. And sometimes it takes through year 3 or year 4 for the breakout to happen. So, if you told me you went after Aaron Banks as a guy who's played football and I think is entering into a chapter in which he can take shape as the best version of himself, I think that's a name that would be of absolute interest to me. We had mentioned Will Fries. I think he's a really good candidate for the Dolphins to sign in free agency and maybe get into that John Runyon territory if it's $10 million per season. The point being, And that's before you even get into names like Ben Cleveland, who didn't necessarily work out in Baltimore, but I liked him coming out of Georgia. He's 27 years old, coming off his own rookie contract. Maybe a little bit of a diamond in the rough in that regard. There's going to be some options. And I would expect the Dolphins to sign too. So when I'm going to be doing mock drafts all season long for Touchdown Miami, for Locked On Dolphins, for the 33rd team, if you see not offensive line in the first round, a large part is because my expectations this team is going to sign multiple guards in free agency. And maybe not break the bank in the way of Trey Smith, but if you could get Will Fries and Will Hernandez and get both of those guys for, on an AAV perspective, probably $6-7 million less than what Trey Smith would get combined. I think that's probably an appropriate plan of attack for the Dolphins. And then you go into the draft saying, hey, we need to add an offensive lineman to our ranks, but we could be a little bit more fluid as far as when the value is there, right? Because that's the best thing you can do is go into the draft and say, hey, we're not pigeonholed into we need to draft this early. Because that's how you draft disastrous players, because you're boxed in and you need to pick a player and make it work in a spot. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. That's it for me. I'm out of here. Go Fins.